something beside me, a light to the kerosene, and the places aren't real anymore, and the faces don't say anything, in the silent light of the mind-blown sphere. It's a game, Devil's Chess Club. Devil's Chess Club.
Welcome to Devil's Chess Club. I'm Aaron Good. In this episode, Bryce, Greene, and I will be discussing some of the various insane history-making events we've seen in recent days, including the assassination of a health insurance executive, or capo, or whatever we're calling them these days, as well as Biden's pardon of Hunter, new Russian super missiles, and the West's new McJihad offensive in Turkey, now spearheaded by Turkey's duplicitous Lil Sultan Erdogan. Devil's Chess Club is part of the American Exception podcast. If you want to see this episode in its entirety and have access to what I hope is the best podcast collection of deep political and historical analysis, please subscribe to the American Exception podcast on Patreon. In a few days, we will release part 4 of our new Gray Alliance series, which looks at the Lansky Syndicate, CIA, Mossad threads running through the JFK assassination, Watergate, and beyond. This is material that I wanted to put into a book, but because of the podcast schedule, I realized that I needed a faster way to get this new material out there. So if you appreciate this kind of research and analysis, please subscribe to the American Exception podcast on Patreon. The URL is patreon.com/American Exception. Whether you can subscribe on Patreon or not, please kindly like this video and subscribe to this American Exception channel. Bryce, Greene, great to be back with you.
It's good to be back here, Aaron.
Do you have any updates on the situation in Bloomington and the protest movement such as it is down there, protesting the Gaza genocide and such, and dealing with the administration? I see you're not in jail yet, so that's good, but what's been going on?
Not in jail yet, not arrested, have not been targeted for assassination. I do have a student conduct hearing tomorrow for speaking, or actually, no, my crime isn't even speaking. It's being at an assembly after 11 p.m., which that's fun. I delayed the student conduct meeting until they told me I couldn't do it anymore, because it's really a waste of my time. So I wasted their time too, but that's what they do. But the administration is still insane and genocidal and freakish. They're still invested in all these corporations that support Israel. They still have the study abroad programs. They still have like this anti-Semitism center that's actually just pro-Israel propaganda. They still have all that. But we have put our demands down for the next semester, that if they're not met by the next semester, well, then we're going to do more organizing, do more escalation. The specifics of which cannot be discussed here, but, we'll be pushing.
Yeah, I mean, you see a lot of weird stuff today. Like, even in football games, you see these commercials that are like, stop hate, and you look at it and it's like the foundation to combat anti-Semitism, but it's not presented as like you wouldn't know that unless you looked at the end. I only noticed it because when I saw it, I thought like, wait a second, what is this about? Like, why are we, this is an interesting thing to be on TV right now. It's not like corporate America and people with money to pay for commercials are always like, man, we just want to make the world a fairer place. So why are they doing this? And I wonder if it's just a way to like somehow get the public to accept more like free speech, censorship, and so on. Eventually, like, we got to stop hate speech and all that, because, it's strange that you don't see these ads until there's a genocide going on, and then it's done by a group that, as I understand it, is Zionist. If I'm wrong about that, then somebody correct me in the comments. But I thought that I did a little bit of a search on it a while back, and it was like, oh yeah, this seems to be like a Zionist advocacy thing, basically of some kind.
I remember being, during my time as an undergrad, it was 2016 to 2020, the height of the, free speech needs to be rethinked because there's so much hate speech discourse. Yeah, because of Trump.
It was a way to blame free speech, to blame Trump on the First Amendment.
Exactly. And I remember being very, very worried about that because I was like, well, I do a lot of research into Palestine. And one of the big things that they like to do to silence people criticizing Palestine is to say that your words are hateful because they are,
racist, basically.
They are anti-Semitic. Yeah, they're racist. And this is a racist form of speech. It's like, no, I'm talking about Palestine. That doesn't matter. The people in power think that this is a racist form of speech or can say that and make it so. So any restriction of speech that you're advocating, any hate speech, detection software, any reporting for bias incidents, any legislation that you put that would restrict anything like hate speech, the first thing it's going to be used for is against people talking about Palestine. And it started happening in Germany shortly after I had like a long argument with a friend about it. And, it's continued to happen all around the world. And it happens here, and it happens in discourse, it happens in academia. And it's not going to stop until people start understanding the realities of, what is actually driving this sort of censorship.
Yeah. I mean, there just seems like there's going to be more of it, and we're going to see how it goes. And with Trump, I mean, the what makes it interesting now, with Trump having won, is that it's going to be harder for Trump to back these things as a defender of, racial justice and such. I mean, like the guy is. And his followers are people that are, they don't have enlightened attitudes necessarily about minorities and such, right? So it's like for Trump to be like, if there's one thing I can't take, it's discrimination. Like that's going to fall pretty flat, I think. I mean,
I guess it doesn't have to ring true. I guess. I mean, if there's even the thinnest veneer, the smallest fig leaf. That's really enough. The people in power, the lobby's going to mobilize. It's going to be like, oh, Trump is anti-hate. I mean, the same way that he was talking about how he's pro-peace. He was at these rallies with all these these Muslim guys, and he was like, oh, I just want peace for the Middle East. Yeah. Like, okay, you don't really need the argument to be credible for it to be effective. And that's what we're seeing now.
Yeah, we'll see how that plays out. Now, I want to talk about some current events. Particularly, this just happened recently, and it's this guy. His face is covered up here. I didn't really animate this graphic the way I intended to, but you guys can just imagine that there's a white guy there behind that box. United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson shot dead in Midtown Manhattan, masked gunman at large. I don't know if they've caught him yet. The shooting appears to be a brazen targeted attack, police said. The suspect fled on foot into an alley where a phone was recovered, Kenny said. I guess that's maybe the police officer. And then he fled on an e-bike, and he was last seen riding into Central Park at 6:48 a.m., so he got up really early to commit this crime. And this is really something because we have, I've always wondered when in the past, like you would think that people might start to go after CEOs and things like that. I think there's even a movie about it. Wasn't there a movie about a guy who like takes hostages in a healthcare, office, like an insurance executive headquarters or something like that? Like, yeah,
that's ringing a bell. But the first movie that comes to my mind is the Joker movie, where
I haven't seen that yet. People say it's good though.
Yeah, I mean the first one's pretty good, and it's an enjoyable watch. I don't know how good it is, but like the premise or like one of the big plot points is that the Joker kills like some finance bro or some finance bros on a train, and everyone's like woohoo, and well, check your Twitter. As of now, we don't know. They haven't gotten the guy. It's been several hours. The video is out, and I was scrolling the New York Times live alerts, and as of 2:40 whatever, they have not found the guy. So 12 minutes, they still haven't found him. There's a story that that really touches on the sort of dystopia that we're on in the little New York Times updates. They're saying that the city bikes leave digital exhaust that could help track a killer. Talking about using the streams of data from all these e-bikes around town to try and collate the killer. So, yeah, I really, really hope that they, are able to enact the proper justice that this situation demands.
Yeah, man, that is wild. I mean, it could be any. It could be someone who was wronged by insurance companies in some way. It could be some sort of anti-capitalist person. It could be it could be done by it could be some sort of false flag in a sense, potentially, if to justify maybe more security and surveillance and such. But I could believe almost anything is a possibility. Yeah.
And we don't know anything yet. So like we know very little about this event. Like we don't even know, like they haven't even caught the guy yet. So we don't have a motive. We don't have a backstory. We don't have anything like that. Yeah. So keep your eyes peeled. But you know how shocks to the system can be used, by powerful people to do a lot of things. And if CEOs are now scared of walking around on the street, I mean, what could that mean? What levels of surveillance or just force are going to be normalized in that society?
Yeah, I mean, it's I can't go around cheering on vigilante justice and such, but you do wonder that something like this could have an effect on, potentially, if something like this becomes a trend among people who might be pretty hopeless and desperate and just wanting to say that this system is so evil. And you know what? It's evil because of evil people who benefit from it, like somebody like this fellow who makes millions and millions of dollars for insurance companies. And health insurance is mafia, essentially. It's like a mafia form of profiteering. It's basically like a protection racket where it's like, nice little store. Be the same if anything happened to it. You better keep paying your little payments. That's like kind of the model, and they are able to get enough of a skim off of people's premiums, and they deny people health care in order to increase their profit margins, which allow them to pay guys like this like $10 million a year, something like that, as I understand it. So if people start making the connections between their misery and the people that profit from it, and the organizations that profit from it, but also the organizations presided over by individuals and oligarchs, then maybe people would think that this actually we are not totally safe. Gated communities and surveillance and all this, like in a crumbling empire with obscene disparities in wealth, maybe we'll have to reform. This is partly what motivated people in the 30s to embrace the New Deal. Not CEO shootings per se, but just the fact that we may lose everything. We need to give up a little bit to avoid losing everything. Maybe something like that could happen again. And in a post-imperial United States, that would be an encouraging thing.
Yeah, we were talking a bit about this, and you mentioned it at the front of this, but it's kind of surprising that you have America with all of its social ills, chief among them this insane macho gun culture. You got weapons floating around this entire country, and then also you have a class of people who are kind of making everything worse. But you very rarely hear about the violent tendencies of America being turned against the people making it worse. The closest thing we have to this is like January 6th, when a bunch of jackasses came and tried to stop the election from being certified. That was like
seemed also to have strange agents provocateurs and
almost certainly
things going on there too. So
yeah, and like even if it wasn't op, that's like the only and it almost certainly was. I think you have shows with Peter that go into that, especially when we talk about the continuity of government stuff being activated. whole other digression. But that is one of the only times where like there's been populist violence, like from
Sort of
your
violence, but
everyday.
it actually it's mostly property destruction. Like most of the things
Yeah,
that they said about like, oh, they attacked these officers, it ended up not being, they ended up really misreporting it. Additionally, there were strange bombs planted and other bomb threats
they've
that were
never
like, that
found they've
were,
never found. I don't think the guys who planted those bombs. I think there were indictments filed, but I think they were
I mean,
dropped. I didn't
it
follow
seems
the
like a
Jan 6 story
gladio. It
closely.
seems like a gladio strategy attention thing, but sort of targeted for liberals of all people. I mean, it's one of the weirder episodes
Yeah,
deep political history, I guess you'd call it. It's very strange.
yeah, but I mean, but that's one of the only times. I mean, you have like the BLM like riots, but they weren't really targeted at anything other than the first night where the police station was burned. But you very rarely hear about like people going on murderous rampages against the hospital that is like charging them $1 billion, or against the insurance companies that are making sure that your wife dies of cancer, or the loan companies, the Wall Street guys who took people's. I mean, the banks took people's homes, like just straight up yoinked them.
Yeah.
You did. I don't remember reading about. I mean, I was young then. Do you remember reading about people going ballistic against the mortgage
No,
people?
nobody ever went after Lloyd Blankfein or Jamie Dimon.
Yeah, and I feel like these people, they're pretty public. They can't be that hard to find. But I guess maybe we're looking at an era where this sort of thing is more normal, for good or ill. I mean, it's not obviously a good thing that people feel empowered to go and just murder somebody on their own. And
Or people feel so disempowered that they figure might as well go out with a bang.
yeah, either one of those things isn't necessarily a positive development for society. But
They reflect deep, deep, deep rot and pathology in this civilization.
yes, that rot that people like the United CEO help perpetuate.
As a fish rots from the head, as they say, right? Let's talk about one of your recent articles, because I'm sure that we'll come back to this issue of, class warfare,
Yeah,
periodically. But you wrote an article recently about the Ukraine situation, and the title, "As most Ukrainians prefer ceasefire with Russia, Washington says more Ukrainian teenagers should die." So what's going on here with the Ukraine? Why don't they just throw in the towel since they obviously can't win? Why would you want to send more young and younger kids even to go and die from they're going to lose anyway?
well, this is the big question that critics of the war and people like me and yourself were asking as soon as this war started, before this war even started. Well, why don't you just negotiate a settlement, save hundreds of thousands of lives? Your neighborhoods don't get destroyed. Why not just make a reasonable deal? And to this day, the U.S. has been refusing to make a reasonable deal. Despite this, the Ukrainian people have actually, voiced their opinions in polls, and that a majority of them, 52% by the last Gallup poll, reliable mainstream polling organization, 52% says that Ukraine should seek to negotiate an ending to the war as soon as possible,
Yeah.
hands down. And there are other parts of that poll that show that they understand that this means territorial concessions, but they're not willing to watch their friends and their family die over who controls the Donetsk region of Ukraine, or who controls Crimea. They're not willing to.
Which are basically ethnic Russian populations in general, like
Right.
majority, right? Like that's kind of the case. I mean, even Odessa is a Russian city. Like it was founded by Russia. It's Russian speaking largely. It's like, I mean, it's craziness the way that the discussion plays out, because you're ultimately talking about wanting to rule over a population that doesn't want to be ruled by the regime in Kiev.
Yeah, and if you look at the polls, they mapped it onto the geographic area where people have the certain sentiment. The closer you get to the front lines, to Donetsk and Luhansk, these breakaway regions, the closer you get, the lower the support for the war goes. So, everywhere majorities support an ending to the war, but the support for continued fighting among people who are in the front lines, it dips to as low as like 27%. It's a quarter of people who really just want to see, Ukraine keep fighting and the country still keep blowing up. So these polls have come out. It's well understood, but the U.S. they see these polls certainly. Their response is to go to Ukraine and say that they need to lower the draft age to 18 years old. They said that they want to send teenagers to go die in Ukraine. And right now, the draft age is currently 25, but the average age of the Ukrainian military right now is 43 years old. So you got a bunch of middle-aged men fighting this war. The U.S. says you need to, get more young people, children, essentially, to go and fight.
A 43-year-old Ukrainian is that's a tough 43 years. Like it's not it's a little different than Western Europe. I mean, due to historical circumstances and such, it's like, it's a tough 43. It's a beaten up 43 typically. Not, of course there's going to be differences, but it's like, it's a shorter lifespan that the Ukrainians have. It's it's like Russia under shock therapy. I think that there's, a number of things like alcoholism and so on that are endemic.
Oh, yeah.
So it's like you're sending these guys to go and fight. Like it's such a what a total catastrophe. For them to have fallen into this position, and it's all Western meddling. Like it's so obvious.
Yeah, and the problem the problem is compounded by the fact that the majority of people getting drafted, they are the people who didn't have the resources to get out of the country when the war first started. You all remember like seeing
so sad
hundreds of thousands of people like just leave the country. They're like, yeet. There are other estimates that put the number at like 600,000 people who are of military age who just left for one reason or another. But the people who couldn't leave are the people who are being stuck. And if you are on social media, especially, like left-wing critical of the Ukraine war social media, even not even left-wing, just people who are critical of that whole project, every day you see videos of people being dragged off the streets or dragged out of cafes, dragged and stuffed into vans, and then shipped off to the front lines. Like, it's a real tragedy. People are walking across the river, trying to swim across the border to get away from all this. It's insane. And this is what the U.S. wants for Ukraine. This is what they say the path is forward. I remember last year, after the big failed counteroffensive, they were talking about how the U.S. officials were the New York Times was reporting that the U.S. officials were complaining that not enough Ukrainians were willing to die for all the plans that they had. They called them, quote, casualty averse. They were complaining that the Ukrainians don't want to die for this dumb war. And that was a problem for the United States. Their response, okay, it's not, let's wind down this war, let's seek a peaceful arrangement, like something rational. It's, let's send more teenagers to die. It's gross. It's disgusting. And this is all for Ukrainian democracy. But Ukrainian democracy is, even if you want to say that Ukraine had a full, vibrant democracy in 2022, fully representative, fully democratic, everyone, holding hands, singing Kumbaya, they didn't. But even if you want to say that, that's gone now. Zelensky's banned opposition parties, accusing them of being Russian
His term
spies.
has expired.
His term has expired, and he's refused to hold elections. He says that he will hold elections if the U.S. were to pay for 100% of it. Whatever. They actually took all the television companies in Ukraine and put them into one company that is controlled by the state. Does this sound like a democracy to you? And it's only going to get worse. People are worried. People are leaving the country. People are getting picked up.
Yeah, they've had a ton of immigration.
Oh yeah, and this is even reported in the U.S. press. And Zelensky's popularity is down to 22%. Like this is not a war for democracy. That's like nonsense. It's always been nonsense. There were people who would die on the hill that no matter what you say about America, American can be this imperialist colossus, but we need to defend Ukraine against Russia's evil, unprovoked invasion. And people genuinely believed that. They were like, close the skies. We need to have a no-fly zone over Ukraine. But the reality of the situation is that this was never about Ukrainian democracy. Western powers had designs on Ukraine for decades. After Maidan, they got their wish and were able to start a low-intensity conflict, and they were able to expand that conflict by increasing involvement, NATO involvement in Ukraine, increasing CIA involvement in Ukraine, essentially threatening Russia to expand NATO to Ukraine by refusing to say that Ukraine won't join NATO. Yeah. And so that's why Russia invaded, and this is exactly what the U.S. predicted would happen.
Yeah, and we were always we were bombarded with American propaganda messages that would disparage the Russian society and they're a gas station with nukes. It's that sort of thing. But Putin has really been a nationalist statesman for Russia and confronted the West. And this goes back to like 2007, 2008, Munich and other conferences where he said, we can't have this system of where our security concerns are totally disregarded by Russia or by the West, and where they're pushing right up against us and trying to basically subordinate our sovereignty. And so this kind of begins a time of more tension between the U.S. and Russia. And we've threatened them with this Ukraine business, because if Ukraine were to become a NATO satellite, you would have missiles, hundreds of miles away from Moscow, which as hypersonic missiles become more of a reality, even for the U.S., which is a little behind Russia, then they could essentially nuke Moscow within giving Moscow only minutes to respond. This is madness, and the U.S. would never have tolerated a move as aggressive as that from anybody else. And we already know that because of the Cuban Missile Crisis, which was actually much less perilous than putting the prospect of hypersonic nukes on the Ukrainian border with Russia, very close to Moscow. That is just totally unacceptable if you're going to look at it from the Russian point of view, given that the U.S. is a country that nuked Japan for no reason other than to just show that they could, basically, and to create this myth of Japanese surrender over the bomb. Well, I want to show something here. Hold on, because this is relevant to the game now. This is the new Orshenik hypersonic ballistic missile, and you can see that it's one missile that does this, but it's one missile that goes, hypersonic speeds. It's too fast to intercept, and then it breaks into 6 different parts, and each of those 6 parts has 6 missiles that go down at Mach 3 or something insane like that, down to the ground. And these can be equipped with nuclear warheads, which would be, catastrophically destructive. But even without that, you could pack them with conventional warheads, or they're even saying that the kinetic force of is such that you could actually, just that alone could destroy military targets without escalating to nuclear, or even like it wouldn't necessarily necessitate a escalation to nuclear war, because the Russians won't have done that. They will have taken out missile installations without using nukes. And so this seems to be clearly a response. I mean, Putin has basically said as much to the U.S. decision to authorize attacks into Russia with advanced U.S. missiles. I mean, what do you make of this?
Well, it's kind of like throughout the whole war, the American and NATO logic has been, well, we can keep escalating because Putin's not going to use nukes. And therefore, since Putin hasn't used nukes, we can keep escalating. So they said, we're not going to send any tanks to Ukraine. That would be escalatory. Okay, we'll send some tanks to Ukraine. Yeah. We're not going to send F-16s to Ukraine. That would be escalatory. Okay, we can send F-16s to Ukraine. We're not going to let Ukraine use our weapons in long-range strikes into Russia. Okay, you can use our weapons for long-range strikes into Russia. Once they crossed that line, that's when Russia started saying, okay, well, we're going to retool our nuclear escalation ladder, our nuclear posture. We're warning the West publicly and I assume privately that this is a red line. And then The Ukraine launched 2 Attack-M missiles into Russia to support that Kursk front that they opened. And then, well, Russia's response, it wasn't to use nukes. It was to demonstrate a new technology that the West does not have that would be an escalation that doesn't rise to the level of nukes, but that the West can't meet without using nukes. Think about the hypersonic missile, the Orezhnik, is that you can't stop it with conventional anti-ballistic measures. Like Israel's Iron Dome or something similar, like the Patriot missiles, they could not stop this because it's not fast enough. These things can target anywhere in the world with impunity. The only deterrence against this being used elsewhere would be the threat of nukes. But if we're still inching along this escalation ladder, then using these hypersonic missiles demonstrates that if the West keeps, promoting these attacks in Russia, keeps escalating along their lines, well, then Russia can start using those against NATO targets, can start using them against NATO bases inside of Ukraine, can start using them against, British and American troops that are in Ukraine that we know about. They can use them in Poland. They can use them in Estonia, all these other places. They're not nuking them, but they're attacking them in a way that the West can't respond other than nukes. And then the West is in the position of saying, are we going to respond to this pretty legitimate retaliation? Because, we're launching missiles into Russia. Are we going to respond when they launch missiles to us with nukes? That's a difficult question. I don't know the answer to it, but putting them in that position is better than just, nuke to nuke. So Russia has introduced this new dynamic into the game that might offer the West a good reason to back down or slow down at the very least.
I mean, I think it's gonna make it clear that the U.S. cannot intervene in any way that's going to prevent the inevitable defeat of Ukraine. And I'm really curious to see if Trump is going to be able to follow through on his, boasts about, oh yeah, I could end it in 24 hours. I'm not sure that will really happen, because I think that Russia has every reason to insist on getting what it wants in that. And I think making sure that Ukraine will never be a threat to Russia and that it's going to be a landlocked, demilitarized rump state is probably the most logical thing for Russia to do. And it also has the benefit of more or less conforming to the democratic outcome of the election of the government that the U.S. overthrew. If you look at that electoral map, it's basically, I think, could be the future of Ukraine, which is all of the coastline that was for the more Russian-friendly president that they elected, and Crimea and the eastern parts of Ukraine will be Russian aligned, and then you will have this basically Nazified northwestern Ukrainian nationalist rump state that may end up what it ends up looking like. And I don't know that Trump is going to be able to negotiate anything better, because there's a truism, and it's taken as a truism among the realists in the IR tradition, that you cannot achieve on the battlefield, you can't achieve at the negotiating table anything that can't be achieved on the battlefield. I don't think that's always true, because Russia actually wanted to negotiate peaceful terms before this whole war started.
A long time ago.
that honestly the West couldn't achieve on the battlefield, as we are finding out now. So Russia has shown that that's not always true. If you negotiate, you might be able to achieve some things at the negotiating table that you can't achieve militarily if your partner on the other side is reasonable, which Putin seems to be rational and reasonable. We're the ones who are so irrational, which is why we have been saying we're going to win, we're going to win, we're going to win. It's like, obviously you're not. And the reason that you're saying you're not is because you're stupid and irrational. Like, you guys are the stupid ones, and you are weaker than you think. And now you're getting your asses kicked, and you're left looking to the world like a bunch of dangerous idiots. And that's who is running this country. So is Putin going to say, like, oh, I'll give you another toehold with like Odessa, and a space on the Black Sea, and a way to, like, potentially. I don't think it makes sense for him to tolerate that, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I think what's the most likely outcome now, and I'm not good at predicting the future, so take this with a grain of salt, but there are indications that this might be where it heads, is that Trump doesn't end the Ukraine war. There's no grand negotiated peace settlement between, NATO-backed Ukraine, or it would have to be a neutral Ukraine, very obviously, and Russia and the U.S. and all those powers. Given the makeup of his cabinet and his military advisors, a lot of them are pretty, hawkish on Ukraine. So not all of them, but a lot of them are. That seems to be gearing up for something closer to a freeze along the lines of North-South Korea, or, pre 2022 Ukraine, like between 2014 and 2022, having a low intensity conflict where, the borders freeze, or the effective borders freeze along the lines of conflict. Neither side admits that they're done, but the active, trying to push for territory declines. And I think this can be achieved if the West directly introduces a contingent of actual NATO forces into Western Ukraine. I don't know if Russia would directly target NATO forces in Western Ukraine, but they're not going to. They would target them if these NATO forces started going to the battlefield and trying to reclaim this territory. But if they're only just holding a beachhead of Western Ukraine, I think that could be enough to freeze the conflict, to make the cost of escalation high enough that neither side wants to do it. It's effectively a Russian victory, but it's something that the U.S. could claim is not a Russian victory, which is very important to them.
Right, and that'll be interesting to see the way that they might try to negotiate some sort of face-saving settlement here. And the argument that people like that I've heard made by commentators is that they believe that the goal of Biden here with this escalation, which seems so stupid and crazy, is really more or less just to try to restrain Russia so that the defeat doesn't happen with a lame duck Biden. You know what I mean? Like that he can somehow say that he can somehow escape the defeat here of Ukraine while he's in office.
Does he even care?
I don't really know. And to me, I look at Syria and so on, and I wonder, the neocons, which seem preoccupied above all with greater Israel and all of that, and Russia, especially after they intervened in Syria, and made it, and were shoring up the Syrian regime, the Syrian government against the McJihad regime change operation. That's when Maidan happened. You can watch the rest of this episode by subscribing to the American Exception podcast on Patreon. In the second, longer section of this video, we discuss some very important reporting on Syrian McJihad and the U.S.-orchestrated Arab Spring spectacle from independent journalists William Van Wagenen and Kit Clarenberg. That discussion is available for subscribers. Additionally, subscribers can access the whole library of the American Exception podcast, including our new Gray Alliance series, which looks at the Lansky Syndicate, CIA, Mossad threads running through the JFK assassination, Watergate, and beyond. To support us and have access to this important original material, please subscribe to the American Exception podcast at patreon.com/American Exception. There's a link in the show notes. And for this YouTube video or the podcast on SoundCloud, please like, share, subscribe, and all that. Thanks to Dana Chavarria for producing this episode, and thank you for tuning in. I cannot get over how grim things are for the imperialist white Western civilization. Western oligarchs have been the prime actors of world history for about 5 centuries now. Here at the end of 2024, we see them losing strength and legitimacy at a dizzying pace. What will be the impact of the Gaza genocide, Trump's victory, blatant Western McJihad terror in Syria, and NATO's defeat in Ukraine? I believe we are seeing Whitey McDollar getting increasingly desperate as he tries his hardest to keep winning on the devil's chessboard. It would seem that Nemesis has arrived.